"This is our salvation," Urza said. Time Streams, Chapter 14. Urza had always been wary of the possibility that Phyrexia could discover the full extent of his plans. He went to great lengths to avoid divulging his intentions except to those he considered his closest allies, and even then, the Planeswalker often withheld information he deemed unnecessary for them to know. The skyship Weatherlight, a masterpiece of artifice, was long intended to be the centerpiece not only of the Legacy, a collection of mystical artifacts. It was intended to be the very linchpin of Urza's defense plans for Dominaria. As a result, it was easily his most important creation, and the one thing that he could never risk Phyrexia attaining. Hoping to keep the Weatherlight away from the prying eyes of Yawgmoth's infiltrators, Urza would gift the vessel to a noble family from Zhalfir, one he was already quite familiar with, as they had been a part of his Bloodlines project. The Planeswalker would similarly hide the various legacy artifacts he had created, gifting them to families across the world. Despite his precautions, however, Phyrexia came to learn at least some of what Urza was planning, both with the Legacy and the Bloodlines project. Yawgmoth orchestrated an attack on many targets, including families that were part of the project. Thousands were killed practically overnight, and the Bloodlines project was nearly wiped out completely. The family that Urza had gifted the Weatherlight to was among the casualties, with only their daughter, Sisse, surviving. Sisse would spend some time as a slave in the aftermath of the Phyrexian attacks, and spent some more time as a cabin boy for a group of pirates. Eventually, however, she would take command of her family's treasure, the skyship Weatherlight. Captain Sisse learned of the Legacy, those artifacts Urza had scattered, and decided to take up the task of hunting them down and retrieving them. Her adventures took her across the whole of Dominaria and, over time, the Weatherlight and its tomboy captain gained a reputation the world over. Their crew would have many adventures, even intervening in the Mirage War on behalf of Zhalfir, but Sisse's focus was always on the Legacy artifacts. Over time, her crew swelled, coming to include people from different walks of life, from all over Dominaria, including one Gerard Capuchin, whom Sisse believed was the true inheritor of the Legacy. But just as the Weatherlight brought its crew fame and adventure, so too did it bring them to the attention of Phyrexia and its lord, Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth saw the Legacy, the Weatherlight and its crew for what it was, a potential threat, and made steps to stamp out the problem before it could grow. Yawgmoth's first strike against the crew may have also been the most devastating. Krovax, one of the crewmen, learned that his family home was under attack by Phyrexians, that his father was slain and his surviving relatives needed aid. The crew rushed to Urborg, where they faced off against the monsters Gallowbraid and Morinfen. The battle was harsh, with the Phyrexians ever having the upper hand, until Krovax called upon the guardian of his family, the angel Selenia, who turned the tide of battle and helped the crew slay the monsters, though not before one of them, the elf Rofelos, was himself killed. Though Vorthos was the only victim, his death had a disastrous impact on the crew. His close friend, Gerard, left in disgust, no longer wanting anything to do with the legacy. When Gerard left, Miri, the catfolk, left with him. Krovax, as well, left the crew, distraught when Selenia departed after the battle, and burdened with the task of lording over his family's estate. With one battle, Phyrexia had managed to sunder the Weatherlight crew. Now, it merely had to capitalize on the opportunity. Volrath, the newly ascended Evankar of Wrath, held a personal grudge against Gerard Capuchin, and decided that now, while the Weatherlight crew was fractured and weak, was the perfect time to set a trap. The Evankar kidnapped Takara, the daughter of one Stark, and used her as leverage to press him into assisting with Phyrexia's plans to capture Captain Sisay, who was then taken to Wrath as a prisoner. In response to Sisay's kidnapping, Tongarth, her first mate, began the process of assembling a new crew, putting together a team to save the captain from the clutches of Phyrexia. Many old members of the crew answered the Minotaur's call for aid, including Miri, Krovax, and Gerard himself, as Volrath had anticipated. Sisay was the bait, and the stronghold of Wrath would be the trap, but there was no need to waste opportunity. While the Weatherlight was traveling Dominaria, assembling crewmates for the rescue, Volrath tasked Meraxus of Keld, a brutal warlord whom he had hired, with killing Gerard should he have the opportunity. This attempt on Gerard's life failed, thanks in part to Stark allying himself with the Weatherlight crew and backstabbing Meraxus. Shortly afterwards, the crew was fully assembled, and the Weatherlight plane shifted to Wrath. However, the plane of Wrath was not a welcoming place. Almost as soon as it arrived, the Weatherlight came under attack by another skyship, the Predator, captained by the vicious Greven Ilvek. The Predator was larger than the Weatherlight, equipped with far more weapons, and was out for blood. What followed was brutal fighting, during which the crew came to learn that Selenia, the angel that once served Krovax's family, was now working for Volrath. The mere sight of the angel was enough to keep Krovax paralyzed with despair below deck. Meanwhile, Mogs of the Predator's crew were able to get on board the Weatherlight and take the legacy artifacts, as well as Karn, the Silver Golem, who did not resist thanks to his oath of pacifism. Tongarth boarded the Predator in an attempt to retrieve what was stolen, but got taken captive himself after a disastrous run-in with Greven. Gerard himself was almost taken captive thanks to Selenia, but was able to slip out of her grasp, instead falling into the forest below. The battle concluded with the Weatherlight barely being able to repel the Predator, descending below for repairs and to search for Gerard. Urtai, the wizard, stayed behind to open up a planar portal for them to travel through, since the Weatherlight's engines had been damaged during the battle. Skyshroud Forest was not absent of intelligent life. In the shadow of the stronghold, there lived the Kor, the Vek, the Dahl, and the Elves. After a brief run-in with Eladamri, who had taken Hana and Miri prisoner during their search for Gerard, the crew was reunited, and the forces of the tribes came together to stage an attack on the stronghold, the perfect diversion for the Weatherlight's infiltration. Even with the united tribes distracting the stronghold's forces, getting in was not easy. The Weatherlight needed to pass through the furnaces below the stronghold to access the vents that led inside. These same furnaces were home to the Slivers, dangerous, hive-mind creatures that became more powerful as more members of their race assembled. Defeating the Slivers was no easy task. The crew had to split up, separating the creatures and defeating them one at a time, but eventually they made it into the stronghold, where the true challenge began. Within the stronghold, Gerard and the others swiftly rescued Tongarth and Karn before facing off against Selenia once again. The angel was powerful, able to grievously wound Miri, one of the crew's best fighters, but Krovax, who had now turned his grief into fury, overpowered and slew the angel, discovering only too late, as Selenia burst into 1,000 shards, that he was now cursed. After sending a distraught Krovax and an injured Miri back to the ship, Gerard pressed on, guided by Stark to the Dream Halls, within which Volrath himself resided. It was here that Gerard learned Volrath was, in truth, Vuel, his adopted brother, who had waged war on his own father, Sidar Kondo. Here they also found Sisse and Takara, though both women were being brainwashed to serve Volrath. A battle broke out, with Gerard being able to restrain the two women and kill Volrath, though in the end it was revealed that what he fought was, in actuality, just a shape-shifting minion of the Evankar. Gerard and the others made their way back to the ship, preparing to leave Wrath behind. On board the Weatherlight, they learned that Karn had managed to retrieve the legacy from the Slivers, appealing to the Sliver Queen's empathy to do so. As the Weatherlight made its way towards the planar gate, their escape route from Wrath, they were hounded yet again by the Predator. During the fighting, a now mad Krovax made his way above deck, intending on sabotaging the Weatherlight. Miri intervened, and the two tumbled into the forest below. For her hand in stopping a now vampiric Krovax, Miri lost her life. The Weatherlight made its way through the portal, which closed behind them, leaving Urtai stranded. On the other side, the skyship found itself on the plain of Mercadia, where it soon crashed into a river. The crew was separated, with Orim, the ship's healer, alongside the Weatherlight itself, being taken by the Choarim, while the rest of the crew were captured by soldiers from Mercadia City. Orim's stay with the Choarim turned out to be a fairly pleasant one, with the healer learning their ways and growing accustomed to their language. Meanwhile, Gerard wished to reclaim the Weatherlight and save Orim, and so struck a deal with the magistrate, training their mercenaries to put down the Choarim rebels. Gerard himself would lead the attack. A battle broke out between Gerard, his mercenaries, and the Choarim, but Orim managed to intervene, convincing Capashen that these people were not evil, and that Mercadia City was corrupt. Gerard instantly turned against the very mercenaries he trained, but he, alongside the rest of the crew, wound up arrested again. Detained by Mercadia a second time, Gerard made another deal with the magistrate. If Orym and Hana could retrieve an artifact known as the Power Matrix, the crew would be allowed to go free. The pair succeeded in this task, but aligned themselves with the people of Soprazo, the city of merfolk, against Mercadia. A raid occurred, the crewmates were freed, and the Power Matrix would be put to use, improving the Weatherlight's engines. Before the crew could leave, however, Takara turned against them, killing Stark, stealing the bones of Ramos, and taking several members of the crew hostage before revealing herself to be Volrath in disguise. For a second time, Gerard battled Volrath, and for a second time it seemed as though Capuchin had slain his foe. But as the Weatherlight took flight to leave Mercadia, it was pursued by the Recreant, another skyship, commanded by Volrath personally, who had once again cheated death. The Recreant was a fast vessel, designed to hunt down and destroy enemy skyships with ease. A repeat of the first battle against the Predator seemed certain, until something came between the two ships. The Dragon Engine Ramos, who had chosen to aid the Weatherlight. The Weatherlight and its crew escaped Volrath once again, and the Evankar was forced to return to Wrath. The appearance of Ramos, hailed as a god in the various religions of Mercadia, helped to trigger a revolution in Mercadia City, allowing the people to overthrow their vile overlords. And while the Mercadians revolted, the Weatherlight crew returned, at last, to Dominaria, where a battle far greater than any they were prepared for awaited. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like or sharing this video with your friends. If you're a fan of the Weatherlight, its crew, or the Weatherlight saga as a whole, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. I'll be releasing more videos on this topic. Finally, this video is brought to you by my patrons. If you enjoy my work and would like to support me, head on over to my Patreon. A link to it will be in the description below. Thanks again, and have a great day.